Well, good morning. I am going to talk about the work of Antoni Gaudí Palau Güell from the viewpoint of symbolism. First of all, let me just introduce some data that I consider that are important. In 1883, Gaudí took charge of the construction of the Temple of Sagrada Familia, and just a little later, he began to house the first building that he built for Eusebi Güell, his patron, the Güell Pavilions. It was a state that was situated on the outskirts of the city of Barcelona in that moment. And just some years later, he began to build this work, Palau Güell, that was the house of the Güell family. And it took from 1886 until 1891, more or less. And it is a work, it is a work that is just in the city center. The Güell family, which was quite a big one, because it was Eusebi Güell, his wife, just Isabel López, that was the daughter of the tycoon Antonio López y López, and they had in that moment 9 children. The last one, they had the last child in the Palau Güell. It was their daughter that was named Mercè, which in fact is an important issue. Then the family went there and lived there in Palau Güell until 1907, when they went to live to Paraguay. And also in that moment, Antoni Gaudí went there to live there. And in 1918, Eusebi Güell died in the house of Paraguay. And then his corpse was dressed in the habit of the Order of Mercy, and the coffin was moved to the Palau Güell and placed in the central hall of the Palau Güell, which is a very special space that I am just going to show and explain in a moment. As I suppose you know, this building, Palau Güell, is one of the important buildings that Gaudí built. In fact, it has been studied quite a lot. And it also is a point of the mass tourism that at this moment occupies some time in Barcelona. But in my opinion, this is a work that it has not been studied from a viewpoint that is very important, that is the symbolic one. Because in my viewpoint, this aspect just explains the organical unity of the work, as I am just going to I will try just to explain in a moment, okay? However, in order just to try to decipher this symbolism, one has just to make some previous steps, that is just study some aesthetic ideas such as form, harmony, and light. Okay, first of all, let's just talk a bit about the forms of the house. There are some common forms in this building and some variations around these common forms. One of the important forms is this one that one can see already in the facade. Between the 2 portals, we can see this set consisting in a helical axis that just goes upwards with this form of a Catalan flag, and then a helmet, and then a bird, in fact, a phoenix bird. This set, it is recognized that it's not very difficult to recognize that it means is a kind of symbol of Catalan Renaissance. That means the Catalan rebirth. That was a movement that in 19th century, 20th century, it claimed the rebirth of the Catalan language and culture. And in fact, Eusebi Güell and Antoni Gaudí were quite involved in this movement. So this is the meaning, the political meaning of this set. But what is interesting also is the form it has, because it is just situated in a vertical axis that begins underground, because we can see that also these 2 elements here in the portals, the E of Eusebi, the G of Güell, are also orientated, forming a kind of diagonals in relation to this center that is underground, from which this helical axis begins and goes up. And then we can see that in the facade here, this axis just crosses the whole facade, passing through this date here that is 1888, theoretically the moment when the house was finished, but in fact the house was finished a little later. It is a kind of also important date in other in another sense also. Then there is, it crosses this chimney that is the largest one, and then it goes up following this spire that is in the rooftop until these last elements of the spire. So this vertical axis, in fact, is in a straight line to a vertical axis that also exists inside the house, where we will find other things. Here, we can see this vertical axis in a straight line to the one we have just seen here in the facade, that also begins in the underground with this ramp that has an helical form, and then it goes up, crossing the middle of this hall, the very important hall that is the center of the house, and then it goes up until this vault. It goes through this oculus inside the middle of the spire until the last elements of the spire. Okay. Well, when we enter to the ground floor, the first thing we can see is just these marbles, gray marbles with these columns and these capitals that in fact they look like Egyptian style papyrus capital, very similar to the ones that we can find, for example, in the temples of the city of Karnak. And then in the ceilings, we can see these forms with bricks that just represent also a square, a Greek cross, diagonals, and the center of the Greek cross. It is from another material and color, marble and gray, so that here we will find another important form that will be repeated in different ways inside the house, as we will see in a moment, until the last element of the house where this cross reappears, as we will see also. Okay, another interesting element here in the ground floor is in another ceilings, there is this half orange vault with a hole in the middle, just situated downwards so that this seen from outside. A very strange decorative motif, okay? Then when we enter to the coach house, behind, we find also in the ceiling these forms. These are decorative forms in tiles made of ceramic, but we also can see that above they are decorative forms, but also they are octagonal forms, where also suggest the form of a Greek cross and diagonals. Then when we go to the basement, we can go there through those two ways. One is this ramp here, and then another one that is here, another ramp, that is this one where the roof is just covered of pebbles, just try to suggest a wavy movement. And here, for example, we find a railing with also, again, Greek cross. And then between this wavy movement, we can identify also this design that is circle, Greek cross, diagonals again. When we arrive in the basement, there are these big columns with these big capitals with circles that also suggest, are pointing to the center of the house, where there is this ramp that goes up in a helical movement. That is the one we have just seen in the plan, and that is situated in a straight line with the set that we have seen in the facade. Okay, so if we want to go to the main floor, we have just to go back and just take this staircase of honor, at the end of which we can find this coat of arms of Catalonia, where there are also these forms that suggest vertical movement, and also these rose buds that here, in fact, they also represent an important issue related to the Catalan Renaissance, because there was a poet, Jacint Verdaguer, who was a friend of Estudio and Antoni Gaudí, who in 1877 had won a prize with a work he wrote entitled L'Atlantida, where he represents a myth. And he won this prize, and this prize consisted of a representation of a rose. And here it seems that this rose also represents this prize that Jacint Verdaguer won, because the same roses and similar ones are represented also in the way pavilions with the same meaning. Okay. Then on the left hand, we find the mezzanine floor between the ground floor and the main floor. And here with this hall covered with marbles, very beautiful marbles, gray marbles, red marbles, and also, for example, this door we can find in a decorative motifs also the square with the Greek cross, diagonals made with flowers, and the arms of the cross also diagonals. And even here, this stud also we find the same Greek cross diagonals. And in the ceiling of this mezzanine floor, we find also again this form of the half orange vault with a hole in the middle. And what is interesting is that this decorative motif is only in the ground floor and in the mezzanine floor. When we go to the main floor, it disappears. But it appears another thing that is what I am just going to explain. Okay. So when we go to the main floor, one of the most interesting things are just the ceiling, the coffer ceilings. Here you can see the designs of the different coffer ceilings, but in fact, these coffer ceilings, they are from different colors for materials and so on, but one can see again the same form. Okay, this square with Greek cross diagonals, even in this element here, that is a stud, also the same Greek square, Greek cross diagonals. And also when we arrive at the antechamber, the first room in the main floor, we can see again with another colors, but also here Greek cross diagonals forming a regular octagonal form. And here, for example, in this room that is the Hall of Lost Steps, the ceilings are also made with this material, beams with another color, but beams that just represent the same form, that is square, Greek cross, diagonals, Greek cross and diagonals inside each square of the big Greek cross. Something similar here in the visitors hall at the end of this passage, where we can find these Greek cross diagonals, and also inside each arm of the cross, Greek crosses, diagonals, even here in these studs, Greek cross diagonals and so on. Also, we can find in some walls this decoration where we can also recognize another regular form, that is this form of six-pointed stars. And also in some decorative motifs on the doors, also these flowers that suggest another regular form, that is five-pointed stars, or better to say two-pointed stars, one inverted in relation to the previous one. And when we go to the southeast wing of the building, we find also in the ceilings this very strange thing, that is some small pieces, triangles, pieces made of iron, that are triangles just distributed, or forming triangles or a kind of molten range. This design is a mystery. There has been different academics that have just tried to understand what does it mean. There are some ones that says that they are such as they are like butterflies, but okay, it's very original, but I think that it has to mean something more, and I will give a theory later about the meaning of this, because I think that from a symbolic viewpoint is very important. We can find it in different of the coffer ceilings. And when later we in another room of this southeast wing of the house, we find again the six-pointed stars here, and also these five-pointed stars, the flowers, two-pointed stars, one inverted in relation to the other in this glass window, stained glass window. And also in the coffer ceiling, the same form, square Greek cross diagonals, with a central point. And okay, let me now explain something. All in the main floor of all these rooms where there are the coffer ceilings with this form of a square Greek cross diagonals, are around the central hall, which is this central hall we have seen in the vertical plan, in the vertical section. And this central hall has the entrance door through the northwest wing. And before we enter to this central hall, through this hall of lost steps, we find, for example, these lamps, where we can also see that the arm of the lamp suggests this helical movement that we have seen in the facade, we have seen in the ramp, and so on. Okay, finishing with this glass globe. Okay, so when we, just summarizing the main forms we have found so far, there are three main forms. The first one is the square, the cross, and the diagonals, recognizing the colorful ceiling and various decorative motifs. The second one is the helical form pointing to an upwards movement in different places, the set with the flag, helmet, and phoenix bird, the basement ramp, and so on, and the vault form with a hole in the center located in the ceilings of the ground floor and the mezzanine, the first mezzanine. Okay, but as I have said, all these elements are in rooms that are around this central hall. And when we enter to the central hall, what we find is this. On the right hand, we find a closed chapel, a very beautiful closed chapel with paintings here. But what is especially beautiful is when one looks up, one can see this very beautiful vault with these openings going around oculus, and this light that comes through the oculus and from the openings is natural light, so that also in this hall we can find just the same forms we have just found before, but much larger. Okay, so for example, we can recognize here the square, the surface that occupies this hall, and then the Greek cross formed with these lamps here, Greek cross, and the diagonals formed by the arches, and all these regular forms, the same ones that we have found before, have the same central point, that is just this oculus through which the natural light enters. So the same forms we have just found before, we find in the central hall, but much bigger. The square, the Greek cross, and the diagonals, the helical form, because this hall is just over the ramp, helical ramp, so that, and also I suppose you see that, recognize that these openings one has the sensation that it goes around the oculus. It has a centripetal movement. Okay, and the vault form with the hole in the center that we have found downwards in the ground floor and in the mezzanine floor, we now recognize it again, but much bigger upwards from inside in the vault. So the first remarks would be that, in my opinion, we can affirm that the presence of these three forms in different elements of the ground floor, mezzanine, and so on, in decorative motifs, in very places, is a kind of suggestion to the visitor that when he enters to the main central hall, he will find these same forms and recognize these same forms, but much bigger in the whole hall, and above all in the vault that covers this hall. Okay, the question is why the artist has just wanted to suggest all these movements, elements, the helical one, the square with the Greek cross, and so on, the vault with an oculus on a hole in the middle, and so on, before entering the hall, in order just to contemplate this beautiful image of the vault. Well, first, just let's continue the visit and then try to answer this question. Okay, when we go up from the main floor, then we arrive to the bedrooms floor, where in fact the decoration is quite simpler, because it was the space where the family just lived. But anyway, we can find also some decorative motifs where we can recognize the same forms. For example, in this far place, we can see the square, circle, Greek cross, diagonals. And also in these tiles that in fact they came from another house that Gaudí had just projected by another architect that was a friend of Antoni Gaudí, Camilo Oliveras Jansana, but they took them and just put it here. These tiles have just the same shape: square, Greek cross, diagonals. Okay. When we go then to the attic, that it was the space where the servants lived, we find all this space. Here there were different rooms. Nowadays it's in this state. We can see these windows that just connect with the central hall. This is from the inside of the central hall, where we can just recognize these parabolic arches that are made of glass, but just try to suggest in also the trencadís, what we find in many other places. And then when we arrive to the rooftop, we find these beautiful 20 chimneys just around the spire. And these chimneys, when we analyze it, we can see that, for example, in this horizontal section, we can recognize just the same form: square, Greek cross, diagonals, and variations of this form with hexagonal forms. But here again reappears as square, Greek cross, diagonals, centripetal squares, and so on. Okay. So it is a kind of canon with a module where this square, Greek cross, diagonals is the module or the first form, and from that emerge very different variations. And then we have all these chimneys around this spire, a very beautiful spire made of glass stein, covered with glass stein, that can be visited inside, and that is crowned with these three elements. That is a golden sphere with 16 cones, 4 of them pointing to the 4 cardinal points. Then this bat with a tambourine, and then at the end there is this Greek cross with the center empty, through which we can see the sky. So that this empty center, we have seen that is already suggested in the ceilings of the ground floor, with this Greek cross made of bricks, and the center just with marble, gray marble. Okay. So at the end we find the same that we have found at the beginning. And when we visit inside the spire, we can find this that is surprising but very beautiful. That is wooden slats that are just collocated, forming a spire, an helical form that is just the continuation of the helical form that begins in the ramp of the basement, continues through the center of the hall, it goes through the oculus, and then continues upwards. Here is when we can recognize again this helical axis that begins in the ramp, with an helical form that goes up through the middle of the central hall, through the center of the vault, the oculus, inside the spire, and these forms are made of wooden slats, okay, until the sphere and the cross. So we can just recognize the same three forms you have found in different decorative motifs in the visit of the house, in very different variations. But now we can recognize also a kind of change, or a fourth step in these three forms. The first one is the square, the Greek cross, and the diagonals in the central hall. Is the main place where one has just to represent, see, and identify these forms. Then the helical form pointing to an upwards movement that just begins in the ramp of the basement, and one has to represent that goes upwards through the center of the hall. But this helical movement inside the hole has a kind of centripetal movement that one can identify quite clearly in the circles of openings in the vault, okay? But then when it goes through the oculus, this centripetal movement converts to a centrifugal movement. Inside the spire with the windows, we can see a magnificent view, and then the last elements that conclude or crown this spire that are above all this golden sphere with 16 cones pointing to all the different directions. Okay? So there is this change in the helical form from centripetal one through the oculus and centrifugal one. Now, let's just analyze this. The second part is just an analysis of the movements and harmony in this world, because we have seen that there are different forms, but these forms have a movement that we can identify above all in the central hall, and that is a movement that just suggests a kind of harmony that above all is concentrated in this vault that there is no doubt that one can establish an easy association with the kind of celestial vault, the cosmos, represented in an artistic way. So in order to try to understand why the artist has just situated this harmony and this movement, which in fact we can also see a kind of rhythmic harmony, why he has just located in this vault in the ceiling of the central house. In order to understand this, I have just to introduce another aspect that is a kind of geometry that I have discovered in other works of Antoni Gaudí before analyzing in depth this Palau Güell. This geometry was made or reconstructed by an artist, a German artist and monk named Peter Lenz, and he named this geometry aesthetic geometry. What does it mean, this aesthetic geometry? According to this artist, who in fact just lived in the same period, the same years than Gaudí. In fact, Gaudí just died in 1926, and this artist, German artist, just died 2 years later in 1928. So this aesthetic geometry, according to him, was the reconstruction, the attempt to reconstruct the language with which God created the world. But it is a language that is geometrical language. So according to him, God created the world through geometry, that began with these easy forms, that is the circle, or the ground main forms, that is the circle, the triangle, the square, situated inverted, and you can see that here it forms a Greek cross. And then all these three main forms that in fact they come from the Euclidean geometry. He just concentrated the three in this figure, and then from that figure he just duplicated the triangle so that he made a 6-pointed star, and then he made more complicated figures, concentric 6-pointed stars, until he just tried to outline the form of a human being that, according to him, was the form that had the first man and the first woman, Adam and Eve. In his explanations, this kind of language, geometrical language, was half lost after the fall, but the artist can just try to rediscover, analyze nature. And also there has been, according to him, 2 moments where this geometry has just rebuilt again in a perfect way, and that is in the doctrines of the Christianism, that is the incarnation of God in a human being, and then in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Okay? So that he also applied this kind of geometry, and with these regular forms to the 3 dimensions, with the sphere of the 5 regular forms. This is a design that he just produced. And what I have just done before, because this geometry I have just found in other works made by Antoni Gaudí, for example, Casa Bellesguard, the same geometry in Casa Bellesguard in Paraguay, in Güell pavilions, so that in order to find how this geometry is located in this work, I have just built a kind of geometric process that tries to organize in a dynamic manner all these forms that the artist Peter Lenz explained, but not very clearly, so that I have just tried to form a kind of geometrical process where the beginning is two forces, opposing forces, one of contraction and one of expansion. The construction just builds a Greek cross. The expansive one is diagonals. And then with these two forces, one can begin to build a kind of squares. That is the first section, concentric squares, one inverted in relation to the previous one. The second is the second section is expansive hexagrams that suggest just an expansive movement, creating hexagrams. The third section would be concentric hexagrams, one inverted with respect to the previous one that also suggests a concentric movement, as you can see. And then the fourth section would be at the end of all this process, one can infer the golden section or the divine proportion that suggests an expansive movement, and that with this form, okay? Two 5-pointed stars, one inverted in relation to the previous one, that suggests an expansive form. Because when one reproduces this kind of geometry that can identify in works painted by Peter Lenz and also in these works of Antoni Gaudí, the interpreter has a kind of aesthetic experience of luminosity that expands. So let's now try to apply this geometrical process to the vault of the central hall of Palau Güell, that it is the place where we have seen that is just located this geometry and this harmony. Okay, this is the vault with these circles. If we take the biggest circle made by openings, we can just find this square where we can apply the first section of this geometrical process with concentric squares. The second section with expansive hexagrams. The third section with concentric hexagrams, one inverted in relation to the previous one. And the fourth section, the inference of the golden section, where we can see that there are the two 5-point stars, the big one in a circle that coincides with the smallest circle made by the openings, and the second 5-pointed star in the center here, so that the center of this second pointed stars coincide with the oculus of the vault. And so the luminosity that is created when one infers this divine proportion is represented in the work of art through the light that enters through the oculus, the natural light. So arguments in favor of applying this kind of geometry in this part of the vault. I have said that this is just in that place, in this oculus, where a non-centrifugal motion begins to be identified, a centrifugal helical movement. And I will just explain how, I will show in a moment how in this area where one infers the divine proportion, the tiles are different. They stop being hexagonal and begin to have another shape. Another important issue is that in that circle where the golden section begins, this small circle created with the openings, it is just the surface that occupies the base of the spire that is above. And then another element is the design of Bratestats that I am just going to show in a moment, that we find inside the central hall. So let me explain the first point. You can see that here in all this area there are some there are tiles that have the form of hexagonal forms. That is just the core of a 6-pointed star. But when we enter in this small circle here, we can see that here the tiles change. The form of the tiles change so that they stop being hexagonal and then begin to be rectangular one with the form of an arrow up that goes in a, they represent that kind of not centripetal but centrifugal. Okay. This one first. The second thing is the one that I have just mentioned, the brass studs. What is that? In order to just, we can find it in different places in this central hall, but above all in two places. One is the doors of the closed chapel and the doors that were through which you enter to the central hall, are very similar ones. But the other ones are here just in this wall. These are the brass studs. That is just a stud that just tries to press the material, okay? But you can see that the design of these studs, it's quite very similar to the ones we have found, the forms we have found in all the house. That is the square, these elements here that just suggest the Greek point, square, concentric circles, and diagonals is just the same. So that even in these very tiny studs, the artists tried to suggest that they could help us to infer the importance of the vault with these forms of square, Greek cross, diagonals. And to support this idea, let me explain that these two circles, the distance between these two circles, this one and this one, is just the same that we have in the distance between the two circles where we have inferred the divine proportion. Okay. So let me just mention some remarks. Two set of remarks. The inference of the divine proportion in the vault is what produced the luminous helical movement from the underground. So it is not that there is a kind of helical movement that begins in the underground. It is just that there is a kind of aesthetic geometry on the vault. And when we just infer the golden section in this geometry, it is when it begins a kind of helical movement that is suggested in the artwork, but that we have just represent after interpreting all these elements. When we infer the golden section, then appears this helical movement upwards. And when this helical movement just crosses the oculus, it is when it stops being centripetal and begins to be centrifugal. Okay. Another point. The presence of this aesthetic geometry in the vault, where we infer the divine proportion of the golden section, it is, in my opinion, what creates a special acoustic that this central hall has. One can explain this, the fact that this acoustic is there because the patron just wanted that this central hall was a kind of room just to represent some concerts, to make some concerts and so on. And this was, in fact, there is an organ there where we can just listen to music. But what is interesting in this is that in the way pavilions, there is a lantern ring, and where I have just shown in another paper where there is this the same kind of aesthetic geometry that just explains an acoustic phenomenon that happens there that is very similar that the one that is created in the central hall. So that, in my opinion, Eusebio just commissioned Antoni Gaudí first the way pavilions in order to try to see if this was the architect that was capable of creating this space with this acoustic phenomenon, just to later apply to the central hall of his house, where he wanted just to have concepts, okay? Well, then there is another step, which I just formulate in a question. What is the meaning of this movement and this harmony center in the whole? You have just described just a kind of different forms, movements, harmony, but why? What is the meaning of this? Okay. And in order just to try to understand this, it is where we have to enter to the symbolical aspect and try to disclosing the symbolic meaning of these forms, shapes, and harmony. This is the most difficult part of the work, okay? In order to try to decipher this, I have just to go a little more in depth with this aesthetic geometry reconstructed by Peter Lenz. According to him, as I have said, with the follow, the language of aesthetic geometry was half lost, but it became fully present again with the incarnation and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Therefore, according to him, the Immaculate Conception can be explained in terms of the presence of this geometry in the womb of the Virgin Mary and the influence of the golden section or the divine proportion in that womb, so that it was this that just facilitated that the Holy Spirit just entered in this womb and the incarnation was produced. But then the question is, if this is how Peter Lenz understood aesthetic geometry, and in my opinion also Antoni Gaudí, as I have said in other works, why in Palau Güell he just situated this representation of the womb of the Virgin Mary not in the closed chapel, as it would be the normal thing because it's the religious space, but in the world. In fact, in this closed chapel, there was a sculpture of the Immaculate Conception, okay? But then, from a geometrical viewpoint, from an harmonical viewpoint, he represents this womb where the incarnation took place in the ceiling, not on the floor or in the closed chapel. Why? So, in order to understand this, we have just to analyze a little more in depth this closed chapel. Let me explain now the things that is the most difficult part of the work, okay? You can see that these brass studs that we have identified also in the doors here are in this wall just outlining arrows upwards, that in my opinion is also a kind of suggestion that you have just to perceive this helical movement that is just in the center of the whole. But when we just analyze what is the inside of the interior of the closed chapel, we can see that these arrows are pointing to this frieze where we can find these forms. What are these forms? Well, we can identify here different things. One thing is just these triangles, brass triangles here, the big ones, that they are distributed in a way that they form a kind of molten range, inside which there are these small triangles, the same we have just found in the copper ceilings in different places of the main floor. But when we analyze a little more closer this image of the frieze, we can here see that it seems that these triangles, for example, this one, that are dented brass triangles, we can see that it seems as if they were human faces with the eyes closed, the nose and the mouth closed. Human faces with the eyes and the mouth closed, they have scars on the face, bloody scars, that they have the form of crosses. What is this? On the other hand, as I have said, these forms are distributed in a way that just suggests this molten range inside which there are little triangle forms that well, are the same that we have found just here in the copper ceilings, forming the same Monterey form or shape, okay? So what is this? What does it mean, this structure or this shape? In order to understand this, one has to know a little about other works of Antoni Gaudí. As I have said, previous to this work of Palau Güell, I have just done other research work on other works of Gaudí that I have just published in other papers. One of these works is an analysis of the parkway. And I suppose you know, maybe you don't know, but it's very important to know that there is this serpentine bench in which there are some inscriptions like this one that were made by the artists because they were made before the ceramic was introduced in the oven. And these inscriptions are all of them, which are inscriptions that they were discovered in the 1960s, okay, very late. These inscriptions have been recorded, and they are phrases that alludes to the Virgin Mary. So that here, for example, you can see written in Catalan, O Maria, that means O Mary. And here the same, but in an inverted position, okay? Also in inverted position, where we can recognize the name Maria. And this M from here, and this M from here, it has the same form that these forms we have identified in Palau Güell. So, in my opinion, these triangles situated forming mountain range, in fact, they suggest mountain range form, but in fact they mean the M of Maria, of Virgin Mary. And in fact, we can recognize that in the frieze of the closed chapel of the central hall, there are 3 M's here, 1, 2, and 3. And what does it mean, 3 M's in the Christian symbolism? Well, it's not very difficult to infer this. It means the Maria Mater Misericordiae, that is the Mother of Mercy, or in Catalan, la Mare de Déu de la Mercè, which is a representation of the Virgin Mary as a protector of the captive Christians, okay, or the Christians that have lost their faith. Okay? So, in my opinion, these 3 M's in the frieze, they just represent this word of Mater Maria Misericordiae, which is just the Virgin Mary to which Eusebi felt close, and that he just asked for being dressed in the habit of this order when his corpse had died. Okay, so that, as I have said at the beginning, his corpse was dressed in the habit of this order of the Mercè, or order of the Virgin Mary, or the Mercedarians. Okay? And it was just in the central hall, just under the vault and the oculus of the vault, in front of the closed chapel where there are the 3 M's referring to the Maria Mater Misericordiae. Okay? So, look here, for example, the spire that is just above the vault. These windows here are the windows through which the natural light enters and just illuminate the different openings of the vault and the oculus, and also through these windows here. And you can see that here, these windows also in some way are suggesting the form of M's. Here, just forming circles, rings of Mater Maria Misericordiae, okay? So, the third groups of remarks. The vault of the central hall represents the womb of the Virgin Mary in heaven after the Assumption. It is this representation where just makes present the idea of the Maria Mater Misericordiae protecting the Christians. the martyrs of Christianism. So that when one infers the divine proportion in this vault, we could say, it is when it is produced this centripetal helical axis that one has to represent as a luminous centripetal axis that crosses the whole. And this luminous centripetal axis that crosses the whole through the center, in my opinion, are a representation of the souls that go upwards to the heaven, as the one that supposedly the one of Eugenie was everywhere, okay? And when this luminous helical form crosses the oculus, it goes in the centrifugal movement because it represents the movement, the movement of the rebirth of resurrection. So that this helical movement that we have seen just represented at the beginning in the facade, it means the rebirth of the Catalan culture. But this movement, it claimed not only, it was very close to a religious meaning. It claimed not only the political rebirth of Catalonia, but also it has a religious meaning close to the idea of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, okay? Or the resurrection of Jesus Christ as anticipation of the resurrection of the dead. So this allows us also to interpret, to understand the last elements that crown the spine. In my opinion, the golden sphere with 16 cones is a representation of the heavenly Jerusalem with the 12 doors and 4 corners. And the Greek cross with the empty center, it means that place where this small center, it means the empty space through which the souls go upwards to the heaven. Or in another, we can also try to explain in another way, saying it is just the space where the Son goes to the Father, and the Father just sends the Spirit in a luminous representation. That is just the light that enters the spire and just after enters the oculus and illuminates the central hall in a downwards movement. Okay. So let me finish with another part. In all the works where I have this, that I have studied, works made by Antoni Gaudí or by other architects from the same periods, where there is this static geometry, I have just seen that there is a relationship between this work where there is static geometry and other works that are far from it and that are connected with this work of Antoni Gaudí to a straight line. So that in these other works, one can just identify the same geometry. I think this happens again also in Palau Güell. And I would just try to show 3 lines or alignments. The first one, the first alignment would be this, the following one. If we just take the central of the spire that is over the central hall, and we just from there, we just draw a line, a straight line that just crosses this chimney, that is the one that is situated just in the facade through which the vertical axis just goes. If we trace this horizontal line from the center of the spine, crossing this chimney and goes in this direction, this is the spine, this is the chimney, and this straight line that goes in this direction, this line crosses through this building, and in my opinion, it goes until here. What is this? This is the whole hospital of the Holy Cross, l'antic Hospital de la Santa Creu. That is a medieval hospital that was constructed in the 15th century, and this is just here. This is just the chapel of this hospital where there is just a spire that just measures the same as the spire of the Palau Güell, that is 3 meters of diameter. And in my opinion, this line goes there. So that in some way, this building that Eusebi Güell commissioned to Antoni Gaudí was referred to this old building, a medieval building that gave historical the historical context, origin of this geometry that another artist later rediscovered again. The second line, this is more in detail. Here is just where is this spire. The second alignment, in my opinion, is one that one can draw from the spire that is just in the center of the Palau Güell through this chimney, which in fact is the only of the 20 chimneys on the two roof, is the only one that is covered with the same material as the spire, that is glass stone. And when we trace this line through from the spire through this chimney in this direction, this line crosses all these parts of Europe until here, that is in Germany, in this building. What is this building? This is the Benedictine monastery of Boyden. That is the place where Peter Lenz and his school was just working on static geometry. And then the third alignment is the one that one can trace from the spire again, but not in this direction, not in this direction, but 45 grades in the direction, exactly in north direction, just crossing the corner of the Palau Güell. And this line that goes north direction exactly, it passes through this place here that is just the temple of the Sagrada Familia, and exactly the center of the crossing of the temple of the Sagrada Familia, that is here, and then goes upwards in this avenue, that is Gaudí Avenue, and this area that is a square, inverted square, that is just occupied by the new hospital of the Holy Cross that it began to be constructed in 1902 by Luis Domènech i Muntaner, another architect. So that in my opinion, Eusebi Güell and Antoni Gaudí just thought that the Palau Güell had to be oriented from the beginning. They thought that had to be oriented in the north direction to the temple of the Sagrada Familia. It was later that they decided just where the new hospital of the San Pedro should be constructed. Okay. Well, and that's all I can just explain in few minutes. I suppose you have many questions just to ask, and I hope that after the paper will be published, I will have the opportunity just to answer these questions, and in fact, I would be very pleased just to do it. Thank you very much for your attention.